Today, our own Colin Lemon will be speaking. Colin and his family became part of the Pathways family in December 2017, shortly after moving to Euless from Greensboro, North Carolina. Colin has worked for the Boy Scouts of America for 8 years. In North Carolina, he managed the camping and STEM programs for Scouting. Colin is currently the Director of Exploring for the Western region of the Boy Scouts of America, which includes 20,000 youth from Colorado to Hawaii. He also serves as the national liaison between the Boy Scouts of America and the Unitarian Universalist Association. Prior to his work with the Boy Scouts of America, Colin was a scuba instructor and taught diving around the world. Colin is an Eagle Scout and is celebrating his 30th year in Scouting this August. He graduated from American Military University with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies and has completed graduate work in nonprofit management and environmental policy. As a polymath, Colin never really knows what he enjoys doing in his off time until he does it. But it ranges from free diving to online gaming and from learning web development to managing the Cub Scout pack. Colin and his wife Stephanie have 2 children, Abby and Eric. And now we welcome Colin to our pulpit.
Good morning. Let me make sure we're working here. You have to hit on. There we go. So this is the 3rd time that I've been able to do this. I really enjoy it. And so those of you who have been here might wonder why I'm not wearing my Scout uniform. And that's because I'm not going to talk about Scouts today. I know that's weird. There are other things that I care about too. And so the reason I'm up here is, ask my wife or ask anybody who's on Facebook with me if I like to argue online about science or anything else for that matter. I do, and it's because it's very important to me. When I was in college, it became evident that the people who were majoring right alongside me in science fields didn't understand basic science, which was kind of sad. And then when I was doing that graduate work in science, there were fellow students that still didn't understand some basic science concepts. And it really bothered me. It always has. And so when I was working for the Boy Scouts, the opportunity was presented that somebody needed to manage the STEM programs, and I volunteered for it because why not? 70 hours a week wasn't enough. Let's throw some more hours on, a little more time away from home. But it was important to me, and I knew that if it was assigned to somebody else, that it would just be another job, right? So that's been a lot of my work for the last 8 years with the Boy Scouts has been about STEM and science education. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And the reason I call it the second scientific revolution is because I think we need one. In the 16th century, just a few hundred years ago, new ideas began to emerge about the universe. Explorers and artists alike had shown the world to see things differently. Not everything that is taught is final, and there is plenty of room for discovery and defiance. Until this revolution, it was thought that Earth was the center of the universe, that blood was consumed and regenerated instead of circulated, and alchemy was accepted as the means to explain the natural world. The scientific revolution was the beginning of questioning authority and challenging accepted belief. I really enjoyed the story for all ages. Only thing we left out was Galileo, who was imprisoned in his home for a lot of his life because he dared question that we are not the center of the universe. Every day, decisions are made that impact all of us. These are decisions related to medical care, the environment, education, energy policy, and scientific research. Unfortunately, many of those who influence and make these decisions don't understand the science, ignore the science, and encourage their constituents to ignore the science. Modern science teachers aren't equipped to teach beyond the textbook. Science is only for the geniuses in the eyes of the students. As voters, parents, teachers, and citizens, we have the power to bring understanding and respect back to science and credibility back to scientists and educators, I'll add. So I want to share with you 3 things that I think that we can all do or understand to make science great again. So I'll ask you first, who here is a scientist? Okay. So the real question, and then my first main point, is that we have to define what is a scientist. Is the definition of a scientist a person who has earned advanced degrees, or can anybody be a scientist? So are these scientists? Would we all agree these are scientists? Does anybody know who they are? Probably everybody knows at least the guy on the right. The guy on the left is probably the guy who's going to figure out time travel, and the one in the middle is the one who figured out how to take a photograph of our first of the black hole. So we'll just point out that first was done by a woman, right? We need more of that. Yes. So we all agree that these are scientists. So what about her? Is she a scientist? This was Abby at camp when we were at summer camp, and she was always playing in the dirt, trying to figure out, from that she learned what happens when she plays with dirt, right? Not only does she get fussed at eventually, but she learns that the wet dirt sticks together better. So she's being a scientist right there. So this is the volume up for this one? This is the one video clip. The volume has to be up, and you'll understand why in a second. So I want to ask if this next one, if he is a scientist. Okay, go ahead.
Begin?
Yeah, shake it again. I don't know. Try it again. Big one.
Ow!
So is he a scientist? He's just like any kid, right? He's trying to figure out why when I jump around it was a sloshing sound. It's because you just drank a ton of water. It's disgusting, but it's also funny. So he's a scientist. He's trying to figure it out. He's trying to figure out what that sound is, and he's replicating his experiment, right? Over and over again, and he's getting the same results. So he can conclude that is water and that it's disgusting. So that's the question, is what is a scientist? Does anybody remember a petition that's been cited many, many times, signed by over 30,000 scientists who reject climate change? Anybody heard of that? It started in the late 90s, and it's pushed heavily by those who disagree with that climate change is a thing. So who has heard of it? I'd be surprised if nobody had, in this group. So over 30,000 scientists who signed this petition saying that climate change, they rejected the idea of climate change. Exactly. Thank you. Take my thunder. Yes, that's exactly it. What is a scientist? So in that petition, I encourage you to look it up. Look at the list. There's an entire list of all 30,000 plus scientists. Some of them were earth scientists, environmental scientists, and climatologists, atmospheric scientists, about 10% of that 30,000. The rest of them had the word science somewhere in their degree, and I don't even mean that funny. That's Bachelor of Science in, doesn't matter, sign the petition. And that's just, you can look that up, that's a fact. There are also a couple of people who, I can't remember what it was from. I believe they were characters in Star Wars, but they put doctor before their name. So that's a different thing. There are real people on there that have the word science in their degree. Or they are scientists. Your dentist is a scientist. There are dentists on that list. There are physicians on that list. So if one doctor told you that you had cancer, let's say 3 doctors told you had cancer, and 500 civil engineers told you didn't, who would you believe? They're both scientists, right? All of them are scientists. But it all depends on the context. That's what's important. I have a bachelor's of science. Who else has a bachelor's of science? I've seen a bachelor's of science in religious studies. And that's nothing against religion, but that doesn't make you a scientist. You might be a scientist for other reasons, though. So to me, there are two main types of scientists. Those are who are credentialed and have studied something, particular science field to an extent, a great extent. And then there's everybody else. Something that's been poisoning science for a very long time, and I don't know how long, probably as long as anybody can remember, is ego. There are a lot of scientists who seem to condescend when explaining things to people. And as much as we might respect the 3 that were up there, I'm not a huge fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson because he's brilliant, but he can also be very condescending. That's one of the many things that sets it as he's smarter than us, he's better than us, I'm going to trust everything he says, right? There are also scientists who have overstepped their bounds by making statements outside of their own expertise. So this is a quote, and I don't know if some of you might know who this is. "We cannot, of course, disprove God, just as we can't disprove Thor, fairies, leprechauns, and the flying spaghetti monster." Anybody know who that is? Richard Dawkins. So that's a good quote, right? Because he's right. We can't disprove it, right? The reason I put it there is because at the same time, he also says that there is almost certainly not a God. And he uses his credentials as a scientist to say that, which is totally out of line. That's not his area of expertise, right? If he's talking as a scientist, he doesn't need to talk about that. It's not a scientific area.
I thought it was Stan Yoder who said, "Stop the spaghetti monster."
It could be. There are quite a few. It's a growing religion. So I'll point someone else out. Has anybody ever heard of Kent Hovind? I'm glad so many of you haven't. I really am. And those who have know why. He's I don't know what you'd call it, a hardcore creationist, also an ex-inmate. I mention him because he also, on the other side of things, speaks out of turn. He demands to have debates on evolution with people like Bill Nye. And unfortunately, people like Bill Nye accept those things and have those debates. But he's a creationist. He's also a tax evader. He was in prison, I think, for 11 years. He started a dinosaur museum that showed dinosaurs and humans together. I'm not saying any of that's wrong or right. I'm saying he is not someone that should be teaching about evolution, right? So that's just one point. I would like to share an anecdote with you that kind of expresses in a very corny and dorky way, and she'll know why in a second, why I believe that we're all scientists. So a few years ago, my family and I went to Washington, D.C. to the USA Science and Engineering Festival, and I think we were going to lunch or something, and I already had my red T-shirt on that I bought that says I'm a scientist because I'm cool, which I was going to wear today, but I've worn it a lot for 5 years, so it doesn't really look that nice. So we're in the line. I think we're at a grocery store or a pharmacy or something like that buying some lunch, and we're in the line, and I'm wearing my shirt, and the cashier, who's, I don't know, in her 20s, she looks at me, and being a good cashier, being a good customer service person, decides instead of just scanning, I'm going to actually talk to this person and engage in this person and be nice. So she says, "Oh, you're a scientist?" And so the way I returned the favor was I answered her and said, "Well, yeah, we're all scientists. We all ask questions." And I could feel the eyes rolling because it was a really dorky, nerdy thing to say. It's the kind of thing I would say if you know me at all when I talk to my children, all of my dad jokes. But I meant it, and I think she just kind of decided, okay, well, I'm just going to go back to being a cashier. I'm not going to talk to anybody the rest of the day because this dork right up here in front of me. I felt a lot like my dad when that happened. So we are all scientists, though, right? We all ask questions, and that's really the other definition of what a scientist is. Someone who asks questions, tries to find the answers to the universe, really. So we've got our credentialed scientists, and we've got the kids. I put the kids up there a second ago. So what do kids do when they're growing up? What's one thing they do they love to do, and we love them to do it? Other than ask questions. That's an easy, you're just trying to suck up there. Play. Right? So what is play? And I'm stealing this. Are we still doing that same TED Talk today? Awesome. So if you're in Harriet Reasoner's The TED Talk today, you'll see this. I'm stealing it directly from there. This is what play is. It's celebrating uncertainty. It's adaptable to change. It's open to possibility. It's cooperative, and it's intrinsically motivated. We do it just to do it. We play because play is fun. So that's what science is. We do science to do science. We do science to learn something. We're not supposed to do science to answer a question that we already know the answer to, that we're looking for that answer, right? We just do it to find out what the answer is. If you add rules to this, again, I'm stealing from this presentation. If you add rules to that, that's what a game is, right? When you make play into organized things, that's a game. And that's the same thing as an experiment. So our kids are already scientists. That's why they jump off the roof of the shed trying to fly, right? Not a good idea, but they're trying, right? They're trying to figure out if they can fly. We're all born scientists, and at some point, though, it becomes more about degrees and credentials and less about the value of asking questions. We have forgotten to question things and seek out answers. We trust Facebook and headlines to give us knowledge. And so how do we get back to our scientist roots? We need to take the time to learn the basics. I know you don't all want to be official scientists, right? But you're all engaged, especially this congregation, is very politically active. You engage in conversations with people in the community, with people in your families. It's important to not have any gotcha moments. And it's very easy to get us with gotcha moments because we're passionate and we want to answer the question and change their opinion a lot of times, right? So we need to learn the basics. Everyone hopefully learned in school, elementary school, what the scientific method was. It's as simple as learning those very basic principles that will bring science back to the forefront and give it the respect it's worthy of. So here's some common phrases I hear from people that are on my side of some arguments. So I want you to listen to the phrases and try to figure out what is wrong with each one. Climate change is caused by humans. That's what we say, right? We tell them all the time, right? Is that correct? Right. But do we always say that? We argue that climate change is caused by humans, right? But it's not. Sorry if I'm ruining that for anybody. Climate change is impacted, and it's made worse by us, and it's happening faster because of us than it ever has before. That's an important thing to know when you're having this debate, argument, depending on who you're talking with. You can't just say, when they say climate change isn't real, climate change isn't done by humans, you can't just say, yes, it is. We're the ones causing it, because that's not the proper argument. And some of this might sound very basic, but we forget it when we're in the heat of the argument, right? So here's another one. Carbon dating confirms the age of Earth and the existence of dinosaurs. Has anybody ever thought that or said that? You don't have to raise your hand. But we always go back carbon dating, right? That proves what we're talking about. It gives us the age of Earth, gives us the age of dinosaurs and how long ago they were, but it doesn't. It's not true at all. Carbon dating is only good for about 75,000 years. Uranium and potassium are used because they have a longer half-life of about 700 million years. I know you didn't come here to learn that. But when you argue that carbon dating is how we know that things are older than we might think, then we're actually wrong and we're not helping our own side. Right? So it's important to understand these basics so that you can make the argument and that it can't be argued against, because they can't argue against that. Anyone arguing against that really is going against facts. But if you say carbon dating, then you are too. Right? So just knowing that basic terminology. This one's my favorite. Evolution is a fact. That's what we say. That's what Richard Dawkins has said. That's what a lot of scientists have said. Or the opposite, which is really my favorite. Evolution is just a theory. So which one of those is correct? Neither one of those is correct. Evolution is not a fact. And I'll talk more, don't worry. I want to clear some things up. So I have a ball in my hand. What's going to happen when I let it go? Hacky sack is a type of ball, thank you. So when I let it go, it's going to do what? Okay, and it did, right? So it's Newton's law of universal gravitation that tells us that the ball will fall. It's a fact that the ball did fall. Einstein's theory of general relativity explains why the ball fell to the ground. Evolution is not just a theory, it's a theory. Hypothesis, theory, law, fact, these are not interchangeable terms. A theory is the highest possible classification that you can give an explanation for how something happens in nature. It never graduates to become a law. They're different things. So if someone says it's just a theory, you can explain to them, you don't have to get into any of the science. You can just explain to them the difference between a scientific theory and an everyday theory. They're very different. It's very important to remember that. Evolution is not just a theory. It is very much a theory, and it will never be more than that. Confusing these terms sets you up for defeat. That's why it's important to know the difference between the terms and know a little bit about what you're talking about. Don't make the argument that evolution makes more sense to you than creationism. That's just your opinion. The argument should be that both sides are valid, as are all ideas, but only one of those ideas is scientific. Only one of those ideas can ever be proven wrong. Did you know that a scientist's goal is not to prove an explanation to be right, but to do everything possible to disqualify that explanation? There are people today that are trying to disqualify evolution. And one day, if they ever do, then things will change. But they haven't yet, and they've been trying hard. Only ideas that have the potential of being disqualified are scientific. Ideas which cannot be tested and cannot be disqualified do not belong in the science classroom. It doesn't mean they don't belong in school. I love that my kids are here because they're learning about all of these religions that I never learned about. I have no problem with my kids learning about creationism in school and many other things, but not in the science classroom because it's not science. And that's okay. It's just not science. It's a different topic altogether. That kind of leads me to my last point. Science is not a religion. It is not a system of beliefs and worship. It does not claim to love you or comfort you. If someone asks if you believe in evolution, what is your answer? The answer is no. I don't believe in evolution. I agree with the science behind evolution, but I don't believe in it because it's not something to be believed. It doesn't require belief. As it says, science doesn't care what I believe in. It either is or it isn't. If someone asks you, and this is a big one in the news a lot lately, if someone asks you if you believe in climate change, what is the answer? No, I don't believe in climate change because it's not a religion. Some people probably take it to that extreme maybe, but it's not a religion. There's science behind it. I don't believe science. I look at it and I either agree with it or I disagree with it. And that only matters to me because you don't have to care whether I agree or disagree with the science behind something. You can't believe in evolution. You can't believe in climate change. Another problem is when it comes to science not being a religion, is scientists who stand by their opinion and become subjective no matter what. There are scientists who may agree with evolutionary theory, and then if they discovered something that went against it, they might hide it because it would shatter everything they've grown up believing. And that's when it becomes not science. Then it becomes a belief system. And there are people out there that do that. There are scientists that do that. They want the grant, they get the grant, but then they find something that goes against what that grant was looking for, and they're afraid they won't have that grant again. So they can alter the findings. So it's hard to trust anybody, right? And as I mentioned before, there are scientists who say that there is no God, using their credentials as a scientist. On the opposite side, there are people who are creationists, who say that, well, there's a scientist and he said there's a God. Can a scientist believe in God? Of course they can. There's two different things, right? They're not mutually exclusive. But a scientist who says that there is no God and uses his credentials as a scientist is doing the world a very big, what's the word I'm looking for because I'm speaking. Good, I'm glad everybody knows the word but me. That's awesome. But they are, right? Because a lot of people are going to trust that person. And this is why people like Richard Dawkins, no matter what my beliefs are, I really don't appreciate a lot of what those people do. They bring a lot of good attention to things, but they also say things like there's no God. And to me, nobody knows that. But someone who's using their science background to do that, it's not a scientist anymore to me because they don't know the difference. They don't know where to draw that line. So how do we make science great again? Understand that we are all scientists. We're all free to ask the questions and find the answers. If you're a teacher, stop asking multiple choice questions. Students should be taught to innovate and explain, not regurgitate. And I'll give you one example. In my program, we have a pilot program that we've been doing for the last year and a half in 4 areas around the country. And I don't know how much was talked about in the bio. I don't think it was much. But the Exploring program is all about getting kids exposed to different careers so that they can make educated decisions and hopefully save some tuition money if needed. So we've got one program we call iTech Exploring, and that stands for Innovation and Technology. And this is being piloted in 4 areas around the country. And the whole point of it is to get these kids to learn about the technology in a particular career field and then apply that and actually do something, solve a real-world problem using that technology or expanding on that technology or whatever it might be. So the reason I point this out as an example is that when you do a pilot program, you go through your first year, and then you have a huddle, right? You talk to everybody who was involved, what worked, what didn't work. The whole point is to learn how to make this program actually work when we really launch it nationwide. So we were doing that a couple months ago. What worked in your area, what didn't work, what should we change, program length, things like that. And the thing that stuck out the most and was the most disturbing was the group in Austin. They did theirs in a school. They did it in 2 middle schools. And they said the biggest problem they had, the kids loved it, the teachers loved it, But the teachers needed more guidance. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, they don't know how to teach innovative thinking. And I thought, well, who's teaching it? Because I know it could be any teacher, right? It could be a history teacher, it could be an English teacher, and these were all science teachers. And that wasn't something that I felt as a negative towards that person. I felt that negative towards science education in general. Are we teaching our teachers to get the kids past the test? Even if the teachers don't want to do that and they really want to do more, they've got to get those kids to pass that test, right? And to have science teachers tell us, it was great because, hey, we can give them new value, right? New value coming to the Boy Scouts of America is that we can help teachers learn how to teach innovation, but we shouldn't be doing that. That's not really our job, right? Our teachers should know how to teach kids how to think. And I'm certainly not talking about every teacher. But that's why I say stop asking multiple choice questions. Tell your kids to come up with the answer instead of picking 1 out of 4, right? That's a 20. You're going to get an automatic 25 on that test no matter what, right? Statistically speaking. Okay, that's not good enough. Our kids need to learn how to find those answers, figure them out, jump off the roof and figure out that, hey, you know what? I don't have wings and I can't fly. And wings don't grow that fast. Maybe not that example specifically. But they need to learn how to do things. They need to learn how to fail. And that's okay. I know that my generation, even though I'm on the tail end of that generation, the millennial generation, a lot of it was raised to not fail. Helicopter parents, don't let them fail. Don't let them get hurt. And I don't want my kids to get hurt at all. But I don't want them to get hurt unnecessarily, excessively. But it's okay if they fall and scrape their knee because they did something that was kind of dumb, because now they know, right? They've learned. They've been a scientist. So my last point is that science is not something to have faith in or to worship. Science is a process. It is a means of explaining the universe. There is no such thing, and it bothers me every time I hear it, there's no such thing as science can't explain this. Only that science hasn't explained it yet. Science might be able to explain something to do with God in the future. No idea. They might have thought the same way about electricity, that there's no way science could ever figure out what in the world is going on there, right? We don't know. So science hasn't explained it yet, but it always has the potential to. That's why we have to keep asking questions and challenge any accepted truth that we're given. Thank you.